This is the word we use for someone who turns their life around in an extraordinary way. Hello, I'm Lawrence, and I am on a quest to uncover all of the inspiring stories that society has lost in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. And one of those stories pertains to a beggar, or as they're known in some circles, a person experiencing homelessness. It means the same, really. And of course, as a certified YouTube sensation, I've done my fair bit of people watching, right? Just off the top of my head, I've been to busy city centers, quiet suburbs, and I think from that I've seen quite a few individuals down on their luck. So I know what I'm talking about. But when it comes to this particular tale, whether you're just looking for a quick dose of inspiration or something to ponder deeply, it is worth learning that not all beggars are destined to remain in their current circumstances. And so, without further ado, let's metaphorically open our minds as I uncovered the remarkable journey of a beggar who became a successful businessman. When I first heard about this story, I couldn't believe how it all started with a simple flower. Lawrence, what do you mean by that? Well, here's how it began. Picture this, a busy railway station, people rushing to and fro, the clanking of trains, and amidst all this chaos, a lone figure sitting by the tracks. This wasn't just any beggar. This was a man who was about to embark on an incredible journey, though he didn't know it yet. Now, I don't know why my hand is gesturing wildly, but let me tell you, this beggar's spot was prime real estate in the begging world, right next to the railway tracks, where commuters would pass by daily. It was here that our protagonist would sit, day in and day out, asking for spare change. But here's where it gets interesting. One day, he noticed something. People were always in a rush, barely glancing his way. But there was one thing that seemed to catch their eye: the wildflowers growing alongside the tracks. And this is where those pan-Atlantic differences really take shape. Or should I say bloom? Because there is one key rule when it comes to success. You've got to spot an opportunity when it presents itself. And our beggar friend, well, he spotted it all right. He realized that these flowers, which grew abundantly and freely, could be his ticket to something better. A tiny patch of wildflowers was where this man's transformation began, and surprisingly, given that I am often dubbed America's finest British import, it's not that far-fetched. At the best of times, I don't like assuming things about people's circumstances, but being witness to such a clever idea was the second most inspiring experience of my life. And I know what you're thinking. Ooh, Lawrence, what was the first? Seeing the idea put into action, of course. You see, our beggar friend, like cars or portion sizes or America itself, had big dreams. I mean, he'd have to, right? Especially given what we've discovered on this channel about the power of determination. And of course, a dream is not the only thing you need to succeed. In addition to the dream, the plan, and in desperate times, sheer luck, which should prompt nobody to ask me about the lottery ticket incident of 2005, there is also good advice. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, Lawrence, the beggar probably got advice from a kind passerby. Well, firstly, that's not always true in these stories. And secondly, that's exactly where I was going with this. I was actually gonna mention the businessman because while in America, success stories often involve a self-made millionaire, this is often not the case in other parts of the world. To go from beggar to businessman, you often have to kind of step up because the path to success is higher up than where you start. There's one thing to remember: this, getting started. But keeping at it when times are tough, it could lead to an unintentionally hilarious TikTok video. In fact, I do have footage of me trying to start a business, but I can't show it on here because I get hundreds of complaints and an equal number of marriage proposals. So just take my word for it. Good advice is of course found in many places and through much of our daily lives, but never more do we need it than when we're trying to change our circumstances. So because of this, it is worth remembering some of the key pieces of advice the businessman gave our beggar friend. Don't take my word for it. Instead, listen to me from just a second from now. It was once said by me, in just a second from now, that you can tell a lot about a person by how they react to good advice. And given its unparalleled record of boasting larger-than-life success stories, America might fancy its chances of winning the "my advice is better than your advice" debate. But the truth is, And you might find this shocking. Sometimes the simplest advice is the most powerful. You can't talk about good advice without talking about action. Action is the protruding force that keeps dreams attached to reality like a docked plane. And the only reason I made an aviation sim there was to draw your attention to the miniature control tower I made from British and American self-help books while I was bored. Anyway, there are several key differences in this department. On British self-help books, the advice is ever so slightly more reserved and crucially more tea-oriented. This makes them cozier and impossible to ignore. How do I know that? Because I was a self-help junkie once. But whereas British advice, that is stiff upper lip advice, is decidedly triple-pronged keep calm, carry on, and drink tea, that's not always the case in other parts of the world. Sure, American advice, the ones whose book covers look like motivational posters, definitely do have 3 prongs: dream big, work hard, never give up. But our Beggar friend's advice, which is easily the more practical and actionable of the two, was bi-pronged due to the manner in which the businessman delivered it. There's also a difference in how they stick in your mind. In Britain, the advice hangs vertically in your psyche, thus making it harder to forget by distracting yourself. And the horizontal connection of practical advice means that you can apply it immediately, but it's not recommended without careful thought. One of the biggest concerns for beggars trying to change their lives, aside from being forced to eat mushy peas, I don't know why I keep mentioning that, is the great divide between their current situation and their dreams. In our story, the beggar's situation was categorized as dire while his dreams were generally lofty. Moreover, British success stories operate on a 50-year timeline and America on a 60-day one. What does all of this mean? Well, let's just say that you want to use your American dream in Britain, but it doesn't run on tea and crumpets, is not dual cultural, or is incompatible with the British stiff upper lip. In that instance, you'll need to run to Tesco to pick up some cultural converters. A cultural converter will convert your dreams from unrealistic to achievable. In the event that your cultural converter doesn't come with a British etiquette adapter, be sure to also pick up one of these. This etiquette adapter is magic. It allows you to turn your loud American dream into a polite British aspiration. For Brits visiting America, the same applies but in reverse. A step-up confidence booster might also be needed to safely use American-style self-promotion in the US. Both are widely available for Americans and Brits on Amazon. I'd say the most obvious difference between British and American success stories is the pace. When I first heard an American rags to riches tale, I couldn't believe how fast it all happened, and not in a Morgan Freeman type way. I mean, this was a Silicon Valley story. I just mean it was accelerated. But in Britain, you don't usually have that problem and/or luxury because a significant amount of British success stories are either not fast-paced or not fast-paced well. This is a particular problem when you are squished in a pub with your future in-laws trying to explain why you haven't made your first million yet. As with many areas of life, success stories are their own subgenre of inspirational tales. Take, for instance, the name that we assign to that helpful individual who gives life-changing advice. In Britain and much of the rest of the world, this person is known as a mentor. This is the word we use for what Americans might call a life coach or a guru. Also, whether it's situated on the ground or the first floor of success, Brits and Americans also can't agree on what you call that area of achievement that you enter upon succeeding. In Britain, we usually opt for the word made it. Please note that Americans, just like patrons on my most recent secret stream, are divided on whether this should be pronounced made it or crushed it. Either way, Americans will often call this area living the dream. More often than not, Brits will call a small business a shop. Americans will call a shop a store, while Americans have about 100 words for a successful person. Chief among these are tycoon, mogul, big shot, or high roller. And finally, venture capital. This is something I've encountered far more in American success stories than I have in British ones. This is a form of financing in which you pay back investors with a share of your future profits, but the use of venture capital might be confusing to some Brits. You might think of venture capital, often pronounced venture capital, as a posh person's gambling, A fine example of which is the character of Mr. Monopoly from the board game that I somehow keep mentioning in my videos just by coincidence. Now, back to our beggar friend. With the businessman's advice ringing in his ears, he set about his new venture with gusto. He began picking the wildflowers, arranging them into small bouquets, and offering them to passersby for a small fee. It was a far cry from begging, and at first, many people were skeptical. But our protagonist persevered, rain or shine, always with a smile and a kind word. Slowly but surely, people began to take notice. The regular commuters started to look forward to seeing the cheerful flower seller each day. His bouquets brightened up their journeys, and his positive attitude was infectious. Before long, he had regular customers, people who would specifically seek him out to buy their daily dose of cheer. As his little business grew, so did his ambitions. He started to learn about different types of flowers, researching which ones were in season and which combinations were most popular. He began to source flowers from local gardens and farms, expanding his offerings beyond the wildflowers by the tracks. His reputation grew, and soon he was supplying flowers for small events and local businesses. The railway station flower seller became something of a local celebrity, his story of transformation inspiring others in the community. But our friend didn't stop there. With his growing profits, he invested in a small cart, then a kiosk, and finally, a proper flower shop near the station. He hired assistants, mostly people who, like him, had fallen on hard times and needed a chance. His business became not just a source of income, but a beacon of hope for others in similar situations. Years passed, and the once beggar had become a respected businessman. His flower empire had grown to include several shops across the city, a thriving online delivery service, and even a small flower farm on the outskirts of town. He never forgot where he came from, though, and made it a point to give back to the community that had supported